Jay's Turner didn't say much these days. He didn't need to. The old cabin he lived in, tucked between the last stretch of pine trees before the dry hills turned to dust, didn't ask for words. It just stood there, quiet and cold like him. Jace used to be a rancher with men under him, a wife who made biscuits from scratch, and a daughter who loved chasing the chickens barefoot. That life was gone now. 2 winters ago, a sickness swept through their town, fast and mean. First it took Ruth, then Lil May a week later. Jace buried them himself, the ground half frozen, the snow falling in slow silence. Since then, the only thing that kept him going was habit, cutting wood, fixing things that didn't need fixing, feeding the fire, sitting still. He was only 43, but his face looked older. The lines around his mouth had settled deep. The skin at the corners of his eyes always looked like it wanted to crease, but never quite got there. He rarely rode into town unless he needed salt or kerosene. Folks had learned to stop trying to make conversation. What was there to say to a man who walked around like half of him had already died? The town of Asheville lay stretched like a frayed rope across the plains. Dusty streets, one saloon, one church, a feed store, and the tiny jailhouse where the sheriff mostly sat to keep warm. The war had ended, but its scars hadn't. Too many men had come back broken, some in body, others in mind. Jace had stayed behind during the war to tend the land and his family. But grief made a soldier of everyone, one way or another. One morning, late autumn, Jace stepped out with his coffee and squinted at the gray sky. The wind carried a hint of winter, not sharp yet, but close. He paused at the sound of something. Not birds, not a branch cracking. Footsteps, hesitant, coming up the trail that cut across his land from the woods. He didn't reach for his rifle, just stood there, waiting. A girl stepped into view. She looked like she hadn't eaten in days. Her clothes were torn at the sleeves, too thin for the season. She had a bundle tied with ropes slung over her back and mud caked on her boots. Maybe 17. Her hair was dark and messy, her eyes wary, like a coyote that had wandered too close to a campfire. She froze when she saw him, the whites of her eyes wide and waiting. "You lost?" Jace asked, his voice low. She shook her head slowly. "Just hungry." She didn't ask. She just said it like a fact. She hadn't come to beg. She came to be seen. Jace watched her for a moment, then nodded toward the porch. "Sit down." She climbed the steps with care, as if expecting the boards to break under her weight. Jace went inside, put 2 leftover biscuits in the pan with some beans, heated it up. When he brought it out, she hadn't moved much, just sat hugging her knees. She didn't say thank you. She just started eating like someone who hadn't known a warm meal in a long time. He sat across from her, arms folded, and waited. After a few bites, she finally looked up. "My name's Molly." He gave a short nod. "Jace." They didn't talk more than that. When she finished, she handed back the empty plate like it was something sacred. He took it without a word and went inside. She was gone the next morning. But she came back the day after, and the day after that, always around the same time. He never asked where she went in between, but her shoes were always more worn, her face more tired. Jace didn't know why he kept feeding her. Maybe because she reminded him of someone who might have lived. Maybe because she didn't try to talk too much, didn't ask questions. Maybe because after everything had gone quiet inside him, her presence, small and flickering like a match in a dark room, didn't feel like a threat. One night, early frost coating the ground like spilled salt, he caught her staring at the family photo on his mantel. He didn't stop her. She just looked at it a long time, her fingers twitching like they wanted to touch it, but didn't dare. "She your wife?" she asked. He nodded. "Ruth. And our daughter, May." She looked at the photo again. They looked kind. They were. She nodded like she understood, then turned and went to sit by the fire again. That was the first time she stayed the night. Curled up in a blanket near the hearth, her chest rising slow and steady like she finally felt safe. In the days that followed, the routine settled in. Jay still worked the woodpile, checked the traps, did his chores. Molly started doing small things, sweeping, washing dishes, patching up a hole in the cabin wall with rags and nails she found in the shed. They didn't talk much, but the silence changed. It wasn't hollow anymore. It had weight, a kind of peace in it. But every now and then, she'd flinch at sudden noises. Once, when a fox howled close to the house, she dropped the pot she was holding and backed into a corner, her eyes wild, fists clenched. Jace didn't say anything, just picked up the pot, set it down, and left her be. She never explained, and he never asked. But he knew. You don't run unless there's something chasing you. And the way she kept one hand near her bag at all times, the way she never quite let herself sleep too deeply, told him that whatever she had run from, it wasn't far enough yet. One morning, she brought him a dead rabbit. She'd set a snare. Jace hadn't taught her how. She must have known already. She skinned it like someone who had done it many times. That night, they ate stew, and something shifted. It was small but real. Jace cracked a smile for the first time in months. Not big, just a corner of his mouth. But Molly saw it. She didn't smile back, just looked at him like she wasn't sure she'd seen right. But she didn't say anything. As the days grew colder, the sky held its gray longer each morning. Snow would come soon. Jace found himself checking the windows more often. Not for weather, for signs. He didn't know what kind, just had a feeling. Molly grew quieter. She stopped wandering, slept inside now, took over cooking most nights. Once, she found a moth-eaten coat in his closet and patched it up with thread she found in Ruth's old sewing box. She wore it like armor. Then one evening, when the sun had dropped low and the light slanted across the floor like fire, she spoke. "There's a man looking for me." Jace didn't move. He was whittling a piece of pine, slow and steady. "He hurt you?" he asked. She nodded. Jace didn't ask more, just said, "You don't owe him anything." "He says I do." Jace set the wood down. "What's his name?" "Tommy Griggs." The name landed like a hammer on the floor between them. Jace didn't know it, but he recognized the way she said it. Like it tasted bitter, like it used to mean safety and turned into something else. "Does he know you're here?" She shook her head. "Not yet." Yet. The words sat heavy in the room. They both knew winter could hide you, but it couldn't hold back what was coming forever. And Jace, who thought he had nothing left to lose, suddenly realized he had let someone back into the quiet. Someone who made the fire feel warm again. Someone who brought the sound of life back to the air. And someone who had her own storm trailing behind her. The wind outside picked up, rattling the shutters. Inside, Jace's eyes met Molly's. The silence between them cracked, but didn't break. Tomorrow would come, and with it, whatever followed her. Sheriff Boyd Winslow had been in Asheville longer than most of the buildings. A lean, gray-eyed man with a permanent squint from riding too long into the sun, Boyd knew every family name within a 100-mile radius and every story people pretended they'd forgotten. He was fair but hard, didn't raise his voice unless it mattered, and kept a Winchester leaning in the corner of his office. Not to scare, but to remind folks that law in Asheville still meant something. He and Jace had known each other since boyhood, but after Ruth and May passed, Jace had drawn a line around himself, and Boyd hadn't crossed it until now. He came up to Jace's cabin one morning, his horse's hooves muffled by the frozen dirt. Molly had just slipped inside with a basket of split kindling when the knock came. Jace answered with a neutral nod. "Morning," Boyd said, peering past him for a flicker of movement inside. "Was hoping to talk a minute." Jace stepped aside, and they sat with mugs of coffee by the fire. Boyd didn't waste time. "You've had company," he said, not asking. Jace didn't respond right away. She needed food. Boyd took a sip, eyes never leaving Jace's. "And now she needs shelter. Seems that way." Boyd's jaw flexed. "You know I ain't here to stir up trouble, Jace. But there's been talk. Storekeeper says a girl's been coming by before dawn, trading things for bread and matches. Matches she likely got from you." Jace gave the smallest shrug. Didn't see any law against feeding a hungry girl. "There isn't." Boyd leaned forward. "But there's a man who rode through last week, asking questions. Said he's looking for someone. Said the girl's dangerous. Jace's face didn't change, but the air around him did. Boyd nodded slowly, understanding the silence. I told him I didn't know anything. Because I didn't. But now I'm asking you. You sure she ain't got anything behind her that could burn this whole place down? Jace stood, tossed another log on the fire. If there's trouble, it'll come to me first. Boyd watched him for a long moment, then stood too. Just don't let your need to feel something make you blind, Jace. We've both seen what desperation does. As Boyd mounted his horse, Molly peeked through the curtain, her face pale. You think he'll tell? She asked when Jace came back inside. No, he said simply. But that doesn't mean others won't. Down in town, word traveled quiet but fast. Martha Tilley, who ran the general store, had noticed Molly's face and didn't like the look in her eye. Too calm for a runaway, she'd said. Over in the saloon, a man named Ezra Rule, who dealt in fur and rumor, told a tale over whiskey of a girl who slit a man's throat in Kansas and vanished into the woods. No one knew what was true, but everyone had a version to believe in. And that was enough to make people nervous. Ezra had his own reasons for spreading talk. He'd been eyeing Jace's land for years. The cabin sat near a creek that never ran dry, and the soil up there still held promise. With Jace holed up in grief, Ezra had assumed he'd give up and sell. But now, Jace was waking up again. The girl had something to do with it, and that didn't sit right with Ezra, so he sent a letter. He knew a man in Wichita who knew a man named Tommy Griggs. Back at the cabin, Molly kept mostly to herself, but her presence had begun to change things. She started asking quiet questions. About Ruth. About May. About the land. Jace never gave much, but when she asked about the apple tree out back, bare, brittle, but still standing, he told her Ruth planted it the spring before May was born. That tree hadn't bloomed since they died, but Molly tied little ribbons to its branches anyway, said it helped keep the ghosts from settling in. One afternoon, she found a rusted harmonica in a drawer and tried to play it. Jace heard the scratching notes from outside, and something in his chest ached. It wasn't grief. Not exactly. It was the sound of life nudging its way back into a place that had stopped expecting it. But Molly had her own shadows. At night, she'd talk in her sleep. Not full sentences, just bits and pieces. Names. Please. Sometimes cries she choked down before they escaped her throat. One night, Jace woke to find her crouched by the window, clutching a knife, her eyes wide with panic. It's just wind, he said gently, not stepping closer. But she didn't move for a long time. Later, when she calmed down, she told him pieces. About how Tommy found her when she was just a kid. How he wasn't always cruel, but when he was, it was like the devil borrowed his hands. How she finally ran when he hit her so hard she thought her jaw had cracked. He said I belonged to him, she whispered. Said I'd never leave. Jace didn't say she was safe now. He just reached for another log and kept the fire going. Meanwhile, back in Asheville, Boyd kept one eye on the telegraph office. When a response finally came, short, no names, just a date and a warning. He cursed under his breath. He rode out to the cabin again. He's coming, he told Jace. Molly stood in the doorway, lips pale. How many? Just him, far as I know. But a man like that doesn't come and talk. Jace nodded once. Let him come. Boyd looked between the two of them, then took off his hat. You sure about this, Jace? I've been sure about damn near nothing for 2 years, Jace said. But I'm sure about her. Boyd didn't argue. He just gave Jace his rifle and said, I'll come back before sundown. That night, Molly sat at the table sharpening a small knife. I won't let him take me, she said. Not again. You won't have to. But she didn't look relieved. She looked guilty. There's something I didn't say, she whispered. Back in Kansas. I didn't just run. I stabbed him. I thought he died. Jace's face didn't move, but his grip on the chair tightened. I didn't mean to kill him, she went on. I just needed him to stop. Jace didn't flinch. You were fighting for your life. I still am, she said. And that's when he understood. She wasn't afraid of punishment. She was afraid of being seen as a monster. of becoming what he'd fought so hard not to be: empty. He stood, walked over, and gently set his hand on her shoulder. "You're not him," he said, "and you never will be." Outside, the wind had died down. The night air held a kind of stillness that warned of coming change. Inside, two people sat side by side in the flickering light of a fire. No longer strangers, no longer alone, waiting for the storm that would try to tear apart the fragile warmth they had just begun to rebuild. Jace woke before dawn the next morning, the sky still black, the coals in the hearth giving off the last of their heat. He hadn't slept well. Something had shifted in the air. Not just the promise of snow or the warning of a coming storm, but something heavier, something that tugged at his gut like the first time he saw Ruth fever set in. He stared at the glowing embers, listening to Molly's breath rise and fall from her place on the cot, steady and slow. Peaceful for now. By midday, the sky was leaden and the wind picked up like it had a message to deliver. Jace chopped wood just to stay sharp, though they had more than enough for a week. Molly helped without needing to be asked, hauling logs, sweeping the porch, checking the trap lines with him even though her hands went stiff from cold. She didn't complain, but he could see it in her eyes. She was waiting too. The first sign came late afternoon. A trail of dust kicked up beyond the trees. Not much, just a curl like smoke. But Jace saw it, and he knew. He went inside, loaded the shotgun, then the rifle, handed Molly the knife she'd been sleeping with. "He's close." She nodded, jaw tight. No fear now, just that wired look he recognized in the eyes of a horse before a lightning storm. Fight or flight. Only this time, flight wasn't on the table. But then something unexpected happened. A knock at the door. Not loud, just two short taps. Jace opened it slow, rifle ready. But the man standing there wasn't Tommy Griggs. He was younger, maybe 30, with a clean coat and sharp eyes. No dust on him. He hadn't come alone. "Mr. Turner?" the man asked. "Name's Silas Crowley. I'm a federal deputy out of Wichita." Jace didn't lower the rifle. "May I come in?" Jace studied him a second longer, then stepped aside. Molly sat up when she heard the name, but said nothing. Silas glanced at her, then back at Jace. "We received a wire about a fugitive, Tommy Griggs. Thought he might pass through here. Wanted to check in, make sure no trouble's headed this way." Jace's shoulders didn't relax. Why is a federal deputy tracking one outlaw all the way out here? Silas smiled thin. "Because Tommy Griggs ain't just any outlaw. He's wanted for multiple charges: unlawful captivity, assault, murder. Escaped from custody 2 months back. And he's looking for the girl who put him there." Molly's face went pale. Jace's grip on the rifle loosened just a little. Silas turned to her. "You're Molly Grace?" She nodded slowly. "Yes, sir. I'm not here to take you anywhere. You're not under arrest. Far as we're concerned, you did what you had to do." He paused. "But he's been tracking you. He's killed 3 people since he broke loose. We think he's got help." That was the turn Jace hadn't expected. Silas pulled a small notebook from his coat. "We've reason to believe Griggs got a letter from a man in Asheville. Someone tipped him off." Jace's blood went cold. "Who?" Name we got was Ezra Rule. Jace should have known. Ezra had been circling like a vulture for years. And if getting Molly out of Jace's life meant getting his hands on the cabin and the land, he'd do it. That low bastard didn't care who got hurt along the way. "We've got a man watching him," Silas said. "But Griggs is clever. Mean too. And he knows this area. Why tell us this now?" Jace asked, still not fully convinced. "Because we think he's already here," Silas said. "And you're the last place he's headed." That night, Jace didn't sleep. He stood near the window with the rifle resting against his shoulder, eyes on the woods. Molly sat in the rocker, the fire behind her painting shadows across her face. She looked older suddenly. Not in years, just in weight. "I thought he was dead," she whispered. "When I left him there, he was bleeding bad. But I didn't check." "You were trying to survive," Jace said. "There's no shame in that." But she wasn't looking for comfort. She was staring into the past. "I didn't just run from him. I ran from the part of me that let it go on for so long, that wanted him to change, that thought if I was just better, softer, he'd stop. Her voice cracked. He didn't. Jay said nothing, just walked over and sat beside her. That was enough. The next day, word came from Boyd. Ezra had disappeared. His wagon was gone, and no one had seen him since the evening before. That confirmed it. He's helping Griggs, Jace muttered. Probably brought him in through the South Ridge. Silas agreed. We've got 2 agents coming up the trail, but it may be too late. That afternoon was the longest of Jace's life. Every gust of wind made the house creak like footsteps. Every bird cry sounded like a warning. Jace set traps along the tree lane. Molly boiled water and laid out bandages just in case. They didn't talk much, just worked. It wasn't until night fell that the betrayal fully took form. Boyd came up the trail alone, rifle across his back. Jace stepped onto the porch. You hear anything? He asked. Boyd stopped a few yards away. Something in his eyes looked wrong. Cold. Hard. Then Jace saw the revolver at Boyd's side twitch just slightly. Too late. A gunshot cracked through the dark. Jace hit the ground, pain burning through his shoulder. He rolled, grabbed the rifle from where he'd set it against the wall. Boyd wasn't there anymore. He'd ducked into the trees. Molly screamed from inside. Another figure appeared, taller, leaner, with a smile like a knife. Tommy Griggs. He stepped into the firelight like a ghost crawling out of a story you hoped was just a nightmare. Well, he drawled. Ain't this cozy? Jace groaned, tried to push himself up. Tommy kicked the rifle away. You took her in, he said, almost curious. Fed her. Let her sleep under your roof. That what you do for strays? She's not a stray. Jace spat. Tommy grinned. She's mine. Then he turned, walking toward the door. That's when Molly came out. She wasn't crying. She wasn't shaking. She was holding the boiled kettle, and she threw the scalding water straight into Tommy's face. He screamed, clawing at his eyes. Jace, still on the ground, lunged for the knife in his boot and flung it, blade first. It sank into Tommy's thigh. He went down, howling, rage replacing pain. But before he could pull the knife free, Silas burst from the trees with another man behind him, one of the agents. Gunshots rang out. Tommy dropped, groaning, blood blooming through his pants. Boyd was nowhere in sight. When it was over, silence returned, thick and unreal. Jace lay back, panting. His shirt soaked in blood, but he was alive. Molly dropped to her knees beside him, trembling. You're okay, she whispered. You're okay. Silas knelt down, pressing a cloth to the wound. We'll patch you up. You won't get back up. But the damage had already changed everything. Boyd had betrayed them. Jace couldn't believe it until Silas explained. We found his ledger in town. Payments, letters, land deals. Ezra offered him a cut to look the other way. Help Griggs get to Molly. He never planned to kill you himself. Just keep you distracted long enough for the others to do it. The sheriff Jace had trusted since he was a boy had sold him out for land and gold. But betrayal didn't break Jace. It sharpened him. 2 days later, Boyd was caught trying to cross the border with Ezra. Both were arrested, but Jace didn't ride down to see it. He stayed with Molly, who didn't leave the cabin for a week. She just sat by the fire, hands wrapped tight around a cup of tea, staring into the flames. What now? She asked one morning. Jace, arm in a sling, leaned against the frame of the door, watching the snow melt outside. You don't owe anyone anything, he said. Not the law, not the past. Not even me. She looked at him. I don't want to run anymore. You don't have to. They stood there a long time in the quiet, the world outside slowly thawing, the apple tree out back catching the first warm breeze of spring. A week later, a green bud appeared on one of its branches. Neither of them said anything, but they both saw it. And in that quiet moment, something else took root. Snow melted slow that year, like the land itself was unsure if it wanted to let go of winter. Days stretched longer, but the cold hung on like a bruise. In the cabin, the fire still burned every evening, and Jace's arm was healing, stiff and sore but usable. Molly took over the outside chores while he mended. She was quieter than before, more focused, but something behind her eyes had cracked open. She no longer flinched at sudden sounds. She didn't sleep with the knife under her pillow anymore. But she also didn't talk about what came next. Neither did Jace. The air between them shifted, heavier, uncertain. They'd survived something dark. But surviving it didn't mean they'd figured out how to live with what followed. Tommy Griggs lay in a federal holding cell in Wichita, half-blind, limping, and facing trial. Ezra Rule and Boyd McCutcheon would stand beside him. All three of them had tried to rip a quiet life apart for their own gain. Now, they'd sit behind bars for it. On paper, justice had been served. But justice didn't fix what had been torn. Silas Crowley visited twice more, checking on Jace's recovery and filing statements. On his second trip, he brought a court summons for Molly. "You're not being charged," he said gently, "but you're the key witness. If you don't testify, Griggs could walk." Molly took the paper with steady hands, her face unreadable. Jace watched her fold it and place it in the drawer with the cutlery like it wasn't real yet. But her silence said enough. She wasn't ready. Silas didn't press, just gave her a nod. "You don't have to decide now, but they'll expect you in Wichita by early June." After he left, Jace tried not to hover, but he saw her slipping again, quiet spirals of guilt and fear winding around her when she thought he wasn't looking. She'd stare at the floor for minutes, unmoving. Her hands would clench when thunder rolled through the hills. She avoided looking at herself in the cracked mirror by the stove. One evening, he found her outside near the stream. She'd knelt in the mud, sleeves rolled, scrubbing the same shirt over and over long after it was clean. "You're wearing your fingers raw," he said gently. She didn't look up. "I need to get it all off. There's nothing left to wash away." "There's always something," she whispered. "Always something sticking." Jace crouched beside her, took the shirt from her hands, and tossed it on a rock. "You're not what he did to you, and you're not what they let happen either." She sat back on her heels, blinking hard. "Then what am I?" Jace didn't answer because he didn't know yet. She had to decide that for herself. Weeks passed. The land began to warm, and so did the earth between them. Slowly, unevenly. Some days she laughed, short, quiet bursts that caught both of them off guard. Other days, she didn't speak until nightfall. But the space between those days grew smaller. She helped him plant corn in the west field, fixed a broken shutter on the chicken coop, even joined him on a supply run into town. That was the real test. They hitched up the wagon early and rode into Asheville just after sunrise. Molly sat stiff beside him, eyes scanning everything, taking in who was watching and who was pretending not to. Folks stared. Whispers followed them like dust. Some remembered who Molly had been. Tommy's girl, the wild one who ran off into the mountains and came back bloodied. Others knew only the rumors. Mrs. Harrow from the dry goods store offered a thin smile, handed over a bag of flour, then leaned in. "You're braver than most," she said softly. "Don't let him forget that." Molly nodded but didn't reply. Back at the cabin that night, Molly leaned against the doorframe, watching Jace fix a hinge on the pantry. "You think it'll always be like that?" she asked. "The stairs. Yeah, maybe. But eventually they'll get bored. Or forget. I won't. That's different." She walked in and sat at the table, resting her head in her hands. "I'm scared if I testify, I'll break. But I'm more scared if I don't, he'll never stop coming." Jay set the screwdriver down. "Then you testify. What if I'm not strong enough?" "You already were," he said. "You just haven't seen it yet." The court summons loomed closer. Each day added weight to her chest. She'd wake early, take long walks down the ridge trail, not say where she went. When she came back, she'd sometimes look Jace in the eye and sometimes avoid him entirely. He didn't ask, but he felt the space grow again. Then one morning, she wasn't in the house. He found a note on the table. "Don't follow me. I need to decide this on my own." Jace stared at the words for a long time. His hand twitched to saddle up, to ride after her, to make sure she was safe. But something in him held back. Instead, he waited. She returned 3 days later, covered in dust, hair tangled, eyes bloodshot. But she walked in like a woman who had found her center. "I'll testify," she said, voice clear. "Are you sure?" "I'm not sure about much, but I'm not hiding anymore." Jace nodded once. "Then we'll go together." The trip to Wichita took 4 days. They stayed in a boarding house near the courthouse. Molly barely ate, didn't sleep much either. But when the trial began, she stepped into that courtroom like she belonged there. She spoke without shaking, laid it all out, what Tommy had done, what Ezra had promised, how Boyd had sold his silence. The jury watched with rapt attention. Some wiped their eyes. Others sat with fists clenched. Jay sat in the back, heart thudding, hands tight in his lap. When she finished, there was a long silence. Then the judge cleared his throat, voice rough. "Thank you, Miss Grace." She left the stand and walked straight past the defense table without looking at Tommy once. Outside, she stood under a tree, watching carriages pass. "I feel like I just peeled something off me," she said. "You did." They returned to the cabin the next week. The verdict came later, guilty on all counts. Life in prison for Tommy. Lesser sentences for Ezra and Boyd, but jail time nonetheless. Justice, real justice, was rare out there. But this time it had held. Still, peace didn't come in a rush. It came in moments. The day Molly strung clean laundry on the line and hummed without realizing it. The night Jace caught her watching the stars and smiling. The morning they repaired the fence together and their hands brushed and neither pulled away. Their relationship deepened not in grand gestures, but in steady, silent moments. Still, it wasn't simple. There were days when grief surged out of nowhere. Nights when she woke gasping from dreams or didn't explain. Times when Jace questioned whether he could truly give her the kind of life she needed. Safe, stable, free of ghosts. One night, as they sat on the porch watching fireflies blink over the grass, Molly spoke the question he hadn't expected. "Do you ever wish things had gone differently? That I hadn't come here?" He turned to her, steady. "Not once." She looked away, even with everything it cost. "I've lived a long time feeling nothing but cold. Then you showed up." His voice softened. "Sometimes it takes a storm to knock down what's dead." She reached over, took his hand. It was the first time she touched him without fear. They sat like that until the moon rose. What they were building wasn't fast. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And for both of them, that was enough for now. The Kansas summer came on hard and fast. Days stretched hot and long, and the wind no longer carried cold through the cracks of Jace's old cabin. But something else had begun to shift beneath the soil, beneath the skin, beneath the surface they'd both learned to float on. A restlessness stirred in Molly's eyes again, though she tried to hide it. She filled her days with work, hauling water, sewing curtains from old muslin, sanding splintered boards near the porch. Jace watched it quietly, watched her hands move faster than her mind could settle. Something was building inside her. He didn't know what. One morning, just after sunup, she found an envelope in the post bag Jace brought back from town. There was no return address, just her name scrawled in pencil. Inside was a single piece of paper. She read it once and went still. Jace saw the change immediately when he came back in with the rest of the supplies. She was sitting at the table, the envelope on her lap, her hand pressed flat against the note. Her face pale, her lips slightly parted. "What is it?" She looked up, eyes cloudy. "He's out." Jace froze. "Who?" "My father." Jace set the bags down slow. "Ow." He was serving 15 years. Paroled. Overcrowding. Good behavior. He's walking free. Somewhere out there. Jace moved to sit across from her. "What does this mean for you?" She didn't speak for a moment. "Then, he knows where I am. Do you think he'd come here?" "I don't know what he wants," she said. "I don't know if I want to find out." That night, she couldn't sleep. She stood out back, arms folded tight, staring toward the tree line. When Jace joined her, she didn't look at him. "I kept something from you," she said softly. Jace waited. "My father. He was the first man to break me. Tommy wasn't the beginning." He was just more of the same. It took a moment for the words to sink in. When they did, Jace swallowed hard, every part of the making. You never owed me that truth. I did, she said, because I need you to know what kind of damage I come from. Jace shook his head. Damage don't make you unworthy. It makes you human. She blinked fast, but the tears still came. He hurt my mother. He hurt me. Then he disappeared. I spent years convincing myself I was safe because he was gone. Now he's not. Jace thought a moment. Do you want to run? She hesitated, then shook her head. No, I don't want to be that girl again. Always running. Then we face it. In the following weeks, they tightened things around the homestead, repaired locks, cleared sight lines, kept the rifle loaded by the door. Molly trained with it. She hadn't wanted to touch guns before. Now she practiced every day until her shoulder bruised from the kick. Jay said nothing, just reloaded and handed her another round. Then one night he was gone. Jace had gone to check the fence on the south line. It was routine. Should have taken 20 minutes. But an hour passed. Then two. Molly saddled the mule and lit the lantern. She found him in the gully near the river bend. He'd been hit from behind, blood at the base of his skull, his hat crushed under his shoulder, breathing but out cold. And beside him, footprints, heavy boots, cigarette ash, and something she hadn't seen in 10 years. A small black feather dipped in red paint. Her father's mark. She brought Jace back and tended to his wound. He came to at dawn, groggy and furious with himself. He was here, she said. He left a sign. Jace gritted his teeth. I didn't see him coming. No one ever does. Not until it's too late. The next day, a fire started at the edge of the property. Someone poured kerosene through the shed. The wind caught it before it reached the house, but the barn went up in minutes. Jace and Molly got the animals out, but the smoke choked them both. Neighbors came to help. The sheriff came, too, but no one saw who did it. You think it's your father? The sheriff asked. Molly didn't hesitate. I know it is. The sheriff shifted. If you give me a name, we can issue a warrant. Law never stopped him before. That night, they didn't sleep. They sat in the dark with rifles in their laps, waiting. But nothing came. The next morning, a message was carved into the barn's scorched wall. You were born mine. You die mine. It was signed with the same red feather symbol. Jace wanted to leave. Molly refused. I'm done running, she said again. If I have to bury him myself, I will. 2 nights later, the final reckoning came. It was near midnight when they heard the horse outside. One horse, slow and deliberate. Jace motioned for Molly to stay inside, but she followed anyway. They stepped onto the porch, rifles raised. He was standing in the clearing, tall, wide, older than she remembered, but still monstrous in shadow. Gray in the beard now, a limp in his step, but the eyes were the same. Hello, little bird, he called. Didn't think you'd make me come all the way out here. Molly stepped forward. Jace moved with her. You're trespassing, she said. I'm claiming what's mine. I'm not yours. That's not how blood works, he said. You think a trial and some pity from this broken-down rancher changes that. Jace leveled a rifle. Say one more word. Her father laughed. I raised her tougher than this, boy. You think she really needs protecting? She's got my blood in her. That's what I'm afraid of, Jace said. Molly raised her rifle. Her hands didn't shake. Her voice didn't waver. You took everything from me. My childhood. My safety. You taught me how to hide and how to hurt. But you never taught me how to forget. I'll carry that forever. But I'm not yours. Not anymore. Her father smiled. Then shoot me. Let's see what you've learned. Jace moved first, but not fast enough. Her father drew a knife from his belt and charged. The next second was a blur, motion, screaming metal, a crack of thunder. When the smoke cleared, Molly stood still, rifle steady. Jace on the ground beside her, having fired too late. Her father lay motionless in the dirt. One bullet, straight through the chest. Molly didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just stood over the body, breathing hard. The sheriff came at dawn. There was no arrest. No questions. Self-defense, he said simply. Good riddance. After the burial, she stood at the grave and whispered something Jace couldn't hear. When she turned back, he asked, "What did you say?" She looked him in the eye. "I said goodbye." Finally, that night, Jace lit a fire in the hearth. Molly sat beside him. Neither spoke for a long time. Then she reached out, took his hand again, and whispered, "Do you still want me here?" "Every day." She nodded. "Then maybe I'll stay." And in that small sentence, years of silence finally cracked open. Not all pain could be undone. Not all scars could fade. But for the first time, Molly Grace was choosing her own life. And Jace? He was no longer alone. Even in a world still full of ghosts, they'd found something close to peace. Something earned. Something fought for. Something real. The days that followed her father's burial passed in quiet, solemn rhythm. The land didn't mourn the way people did. It simply moved on. The sun still rose over the dry hills. Cicadas still whined in the grass. And the wind carried no memory of blood. But within the house, something had shifted. It wasn't just the absence of fear. It was the presence of something deeper. A long-buried calm, finally breaking the surface. Molly moved through the cabin as if waking from a long sleep. She touched the walls Jace had built, ran her fingers along the fresh linen she'd sewn for the bed. She even smiled at the mule when it gave her attitude near the trough. And Jace, he watched her like a man watching spring after a long, brutal winter. Not with hunger, not with doubt, but with awe, cautious and reverent. They didn't speak much about the night her father died. Some things had already been said with enough weight to last a lifetime. Instead, they started planting again. A new section of beans, peppers, even flowers, a wild scatter of yellow daisies behind the shed. Jace had never bothered with beauty for its own sake. But Molly had said they reminded her of home, and that was reason enough. One evening, a thunderstorm rolled in fast. Wind slammed the shutters, and rain hit the tin roof like hoofbeats. Jace reached to bolt the front door and found Molly already there, laughing under her breath as she beat him to it. She looked at him through the dim light, her hair wild, her dress damp at the hem. "Don't worry," she said. "This kind of storm can't break me." He nodded. "I know." Later, after the storm passed, and they lay beside each other in bed, she said softly, "I'm not the same girl you found." Jace traced the curve of her knuckles with his calloused thumb. "I know that too. I think I'm finally free." He said nothing. He just pulled her closer. And in that silence, she felt what real safety was, what it meant when someone saw you, all of you, and didn't flinch. Weeks turned to months. The town stopped whispering about that Comanche girl and started waving when she passed. The shopkeeper smiled when she came in for flour. A neighbor asked for a pie recipe. It was slow, this recognition, but it came, and Molly earned every inch of it. One day, while sorting through old papers in the attic, she found a worn journal with her name scratched on the cover. Not from her childhood, but something new she must have started in secret. Inside were bits of memories, poems half finished, dreams half sketched. On the last page, in careful ink, she'd written, "Maybe I don't have to forget to heal. Maybe remembering is how I begin." She showed it to Jace. "You're a writer," he said. "I'm a survivor. Maybe you're both." She thought about that for a long moment, then nodded. "Maybe I am." And then, on a Sunday morning heavy with clouds, Cora Lee rode into town. Alive, thin, different, but real. When Molly saw her, she stood stunned in the middle of the road. Cora Lee dismounted slowly, tears already streaming down her face. "I'm sorry," Cora Lee choked. "I didn't mean to disappear. I couldn't. He wouldn't let me." Molly crossed the distance in 2 strides and pulled her sister into a hard embrace. "You're home," Molly whispered. "That's all that matters." Jay stood a few paces back, watching quietly, his heart full. The past had tried to destroy them again and again. But here they were, still standing, still choosing each other. In time, Corley moved in. The cabin grew a second room. Laughter returned in full. They weren't healed completely. Healing, Molly now knew, wasn't a destination, it was a decision. Made daily, in little ways. Years later, when people asked Molly how she'd survived all she had, she'd only say, I didn't. Not alone. And in her smile, in the grip of her hand around Jace's, in the strength of her voice when she told her story to young girls in town, the truth lingered. Some storms don't pass. Some have to be walked through. But sometimes, if you're lucky, there's someone on the other side waiting to walk beside you.